You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, as we were kicking around ideas, the thought of one of the best John Wesley quotes that we know as Wesley was, "The world is my parish." And so, Zach, as you hear that, what does that mean for you?
I want to be clear, as we kicked around ideas, we asked GPT what we should talk about today, and it said John Wesley.
We actually kicked around ideas for 45 minutes before I typed in the GPT what we should talk about. So let's clarify that we actually tried to do some work before we cheated.
Correct. Yeah, well, we didn't cheat. The robots are listening, so I just took all of that in and shoved it out. No, I love The World Is My Parish. I mean, obviously it's a foundational piece of who we are as Wesleyans. In one of the fundamental moments in my life and ministry that surrounds this particular quote, that I really began to understand what it meant, that the world is my parish, back a ton of years ago when I was an associate pastor. I was doing a communion at a table at a farmer's market, and I was serving communion, and then we had a big whiteboard that people would come in with Sharpie and write their prayer requests on, and then we just served communion. We were just present, offered anybody who wanted to come to the table, celebrated communion with them, prayed with them as they wrote their prayers on the wall. And the prayer board was equally as cool, because it was anything from, gosh, my mom has cancer and is sick, to my kid's struggling in school, or my neighbor can't park right. I mean, it was just all of the things that make us human were up on that board, and it was super cool. But it was communion that led to a lot of interesting conversations, because we were just there. We were just present in the community at this farmer's market with no agenda, just there. And, often people would come up and ask what we were doing. Hey, just serving communion. And it was, well, what do we have to do? What church are you? Oh, I'm not Methodist. Don't have to be. It's okay. Or I don't go to church. We had one individual who came back for several weeks in a row, who told me the first time that he was there that he grew up Lutheran, hadn't been to church in 40 plus years. And that was the first time he had been offered communion in 40 years, and came to the table week after week after week. And then I'd have really fun conversations with folks who told me, you can't do this. You can't do communion outside of the church. How dare you? And my response was, the world is our parish. This is the church. Being with people is the church, and coming and celebrating and offering this open table for anybody to come, that's the church. That's who and where we're called to be. And I'm sorry if you don't agree with that, but you're more than welcome to take communion. If not, that's okay too. But this is where we're going to be. And that those moments of, man, I haven't been to church in 40 years. And even those moments of, you can't be here, really, really led me to lean into, it's far beyond the four walls, far beyond our own hearts, far beyond our own boxes we put ministry and our profession and calling in here. Wesley saw that early on in The World Is My Parish. And so that simple experience is communion in a farmer's market really helped me lean into that idea and flesh that out in a lot of ways over the last 15 years.
Yeah. And so what's interesting, it's kind of one of those quotes that it's been recasted. So the actual quote is, "I will look upon all the world as my parish." Mm-hmm. And we found it's found in a John Wesley journal entry. And what's interesting about that is you think about what he was going through, mm-hmm. and
he was really trying to explain why he was doing what he did.
Right.
Because, often the church was seen as just this thing that just was like state regulated, just stuck.
Right.
Like he felt stuck. And so I think, one of the things that Wesley did and encouraged was being on the outside, on the peripherals of the world. And what's interesting, and I just thinking about this as you were talking, is that for Wesley, the known world wasn't what it is to what we know it as today.
Right.
And so I would say that for Wesley and even for us, like let's take this like we would eat an elephant. Let's take it one bite at a time. That our worlds, or whatever we encounter physically and digitally, and I now say digitally. I used to just say physically, but now I really believe in that the digital world does have an effect on us, and we have to understand how it does and why. We have to be very aware of all those things, and it really does go out with what I send our congregation out, or I send my congregation out every Sunday. Is you are going out in the world to be a light and to be the light and love of Christ for the world. And that world isn't necessarily like the world, but it is whatever you encounter on a daily basis. That is the world that you know. And so how are you going to live it out? How are you going to be how are you going to be an example of God in that world, in your world? And when you start to unpack, like you start to think about that, you can see how changing the world becomes a little bit easier if you start small versus like, all right, so I want to end world hunger tomorrow. Well, the money's there. We just got to get people to give the money. And the resources are there. We just got to, convince people. But what if we just took it? I want to solve hunger on my block and really like focused on my community and things like that. I think when we say world, it scares people. It really does. But what if we repackage that to recognize that the world is whatever you experience on a daily basis? And to me, that's how I take that quote. The world is my parish. We are called to be out in the world, not just be stuck in the four walls of the church every day.
No, I think so. I frame that very much the same way for my folks. It's the world is what you encounter. It's where you're present every day, and it's the people and places that surround you, and that shrinks it a little bit to something that's very personal. And also the world is big, right? In you talk about Wesley and the world that he lived in is vastly different in understanding and context than the world we live in today. The world we live in today is vastly different than the world we lived in 5 years ago, right? A lot of the elements and pieces are there, but we also have just looking at our churches and live streaming and doing the things in our digital presence, we are reaching people we weren't reaching before, or we're being able to stay in community with people who have moved away from our physical communities, who have relatives and people who are maybe physical with us, but are showing up digitally, showing up online. And that's a huge and important world that we live in that we have to pay attention to. I think it's a fascinating conversation of what is our parish, what is the world that surrounds us, and how do we faithfully and hopefully lean into that to bring God's love and grace to all people, right? Like in doing the same things that Wesley did in trying to reshape who he was called to be in this preacher, and going and speaking to injustices of the world that are around him and finding fields to preach in, right? So people could hear him. How do we do that? How are we doing that in a way that's hopeful and helpful?
Yeah. And I think that that's where like, really leaning in and recognizing, like, I mean, if we want to go scripturally, looking at Luke 4 and seeing where Jesus said where he was called to, and making that part of making that our call, and making that who we are and what we do. And I think that becomes a really great way of doing it, and that we are called out into the world to care for those who are hurting, to care for the poor. And one of the things I've found myself saying a lot more, it's more than just the financially poor, it's the spiritually poor.
For sure.
And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation when we talk about the poor, because we hear poor and we think of people who are without. But what if we actually started thinking about the spiritual poor, and what would that look like? I think that would definitely provide some interesting perspective on things. Traditionally, what's really interesting, I was in a meeting a few weeks ago with a bunch of clergy from all over Douglas County, and they had one of the Episcopal churches had this sticker that said "Shield the Joyous." And they talked about that it's part of this prayer. And so, me being the nerd that I am, I went to my 1979 Book of Common Worship to find this prayer, and sure enough, I found it. And the prayer goes like this: keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Jesus Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous, and for all your love's sake, amen. Like, and I thought about that in the context of what I'm going to talk about on Sunday, and the idea of following Jesus and is to live as the world is our parish. And so wherever we go, we are called to be like Jesus to the world, whether that's going and sitting at Walmart and caring for the woman who, you can tell is tired and weary and is checking you out, and maybe she made a mistake. How do we handle ourselves Christ-like there? How do we handle ourselves at restaurants? I mean, we have to do a better job of presenting Jesus to the world. We don't need a PR program to do that.
Right. And it is. I mean, it truly, you lean into that. The world is my parish. It's a stark reminder that everywhere we go, maybe opportunity is the wrong word, but I'm going to use it. There's an opportunity to share God's love and grace in a variety of ways. And not recognizing that is missing the boat, right? And there are days we get it right, and there are days that we're tired and we want to do anything else and just be left alone. But acknowledging somebody's humanity and dignity goes a long way. Caring for the people around you goes a long way. It's not just, hey, do you love Jesus? Let me tell you about Jesus. It's not just that, right? It's so much more than that. And how do we lean into that everywhere we go?
Well, I also think too, the thing is like, it's not that you have to have a track or a story or
right.
a deep question. It really is about just how you're living your life.
Yeah. It's about being authentic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a text from a young lady this morning, in fact, that I got to do their wedding a couple of years ago. And she just simply reached out and said, hey, I met somebody yesterday that and I just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for being there. Thanks for being a faithful guide for me. And I don't think I've ever told you that. And I just wanted you to know how much you mean. And truly, the more people I meet in this area that know you, how much of an impact you've had just by being authentically you. So thank you for that. I wanted you to know. And oh my gosh, it means the world, because we never know, right? Just being ourselves goes a long way.
Well, and I think that's definitely a good place to land today is asking our listeners to challenge themselves on how are you sharing the love of God with the world, and being aware of that, and what can you do to make it better. And I think that's definitely a good place to land. What do you think, Zach?
I think so too.
So we want to encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com, where we have a lot of great content and things that you can buy and purchase. It is getting closer to Pastor Appreciation Month. And so I want to encourage you to, if you've got a pastor that you feel like needs a bearded theologian thing, feel free and pick something up. It'd be a good gift for them. We'd also encourage you to like us and share us and give us the 5 stars with a funny review. We do like to give stickers out to people who write funny reviews on us. And so we pay attention to that, and, just encourage you to do that. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.